The Batasang Pambansa is already on set as Philippine President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. will be delivering his third State of the Nation address or SONA 2024 this Monday at 4 p.m. Filipinos from various sectors are anticipating that the upcoming SONA will address their concerns and see progress with the President's previous promises. So their question is, will they hear fulfilled promises, or if this will remain as unfinished business? I am Edge Eva, a multimedia reporter from BusinessWorld. For this B-side episode, I will talk to Mr. Jemy Gatdula, the Dean of the Institute of Law at the University of Asia and Pacific, and an opinions columnist for BusinessWorld. He will share the accomplishments and progress that the Marcos administration have achieved that might be addressed on the upcoming SONA. Also, he will discuss issues from several sectors that remain unaddressed or still a pending matter that Marcos administration could focus on. Hello, Mr. Gatdula. Pleasure to meet you. Which plans or promise from the 2023 SONA do you believe have been accomplished or have shown considerable progress?
Well, the first one would have to be on security. Definitely, there is a need, and not necessarily because of the fact that it was something that we had the choice. The Philippines has been confronted with an aggressive neighbor in China, and therefore it's something that the Marcos administration had to respond with an incredibly quick learning curve as a necessity. But so far, I have to say they have admirably responded as well as it could possibly do. It has been able to establish alliances, able to initiate the beginnings of strengthening our capabilities, and more importantly, I think it has been able to communicate to our people the reasons why there's a need to stand up for our territory and for the interests of our country. And that has been something that is incredibly lacking for the past in the past 6 years of the previous administration. And for me, it's a positive approach and it's a positive step for our country. Not necessarily a second matter, but something I think which is closely related to the first would be in relation to the economy of the country. I think there has been good attempts to be able to stabilize inflation. There have been good efforts as well to stabilize with regard to unemployment, particularly the labor participation rate. There have been concerns with regard to recent rises, however slight, with regard to hunger, but again, that has to be taken into context. And also in relation to the fact that the peso, there has been some worries with the weakening of the peso. But again, that has to be placed in a certain context as well. So overall, I believe that the Marcos administration is in general, moving in the right direction. I think our people has to understand that it's incredibly difficult to be able to rectify mistakes that have been made in the past. And to be able to stabilize, to be able to make the corrections, it really takes an incredible amount of time and effort. And I believe that a certain amount of patience is needed for the Marcos administration. But hopefully, once these corrections are made, and hopefully once stability is indeed placed in our system, we could really be very optimistic that there are better days ahead for the Philippines. And I think the indicators are there, particularly for 2025, that the Philippines will probably be one of the strongest growing countries, particularly in ASEAN. And obviously, there's a lot of need to be worked on with regard to education as well.
You mentioned that Marcos administration is in the right direction to stabilize the Philippine economy, despite the mistakes of the previous administration. Do you think that the Marcos administration has fully recovered the country's economy from the downturn caused by the COVID-19 pandemic?
No, definitely not. We're in the middle of, as I said, in trying to be able to correct and then later stabilize whatever negative consequences or effects that may have been that may have happened because of the last administration's, I think, policies. Whether or not they were ill-intentioned or not is beside the point. The thing is that we had those policies, and some of them essentially did not do well for the country. In fairness, of course, there was the pandemic that happened, but even then, I think there were certain decisions that I believe could have been taken that could have been better for the country. We had an incredibly long lockdown, and I think we're still suffering from the effects of that. The fact that there has been, by some accounts, an utterly violent response to the drug issue, which I believe has not necessarily endeared us to the investors, and as well as for people that are more akin to human rights. And the fact also that we have not been a very stable or reliable ally with regard to security issues in the West Philippine Sea, also I think it affected our ability to be able to have stronger economic ties with other countries. Now that we have placed a clear position on what are we to do with regard to the West Philippine Sea, the fact that our efforts in relation to crime and law and order are now more attuned to the Constitution, and the fact that we have at least a freer hand, a lesser emphasis on bureaucracy and red tape, I think are good first steps. Remember that we have in relation to the priority bills, I think of so many priorities, 17 or so, only around 3 have been actually legislated into law. And they're not necessarily the most far-reaching consequences, except for perhaps for the Buy Filipino movement. But the others have been pending in relation to, as far as the Senate is concerned. The House has certainly done its job, and kudos to Speaker Romualdez for that. But a lot of the legislation has simply been stalled when it came to the Senate. Let's see what Senate President Escudero will do, and hopefully that will provide an injection of greater energy as far as the Senate is concerned, and so that the legislative direction that the Marcos administration wants could actually be fully implemented.
Which plans from the 2023 SONA remain unaddressed or still an unfinished business for the Marcos administration?
Well, education, I think. Unfortunately, politicking has gotten in the way as far as that is concerned. A huge number of emphasis obviously was placed on defense spending and defense capabilities. I think agriculture is one area that needs to be given special attention to. There are difficulties, I believe, that were confronted in that area, which again needed a certain amount of correction, which again needed a certain amount of time. Issues with regard to labor, employment, and so on. The thing is that you can't really make huge strides. I mean, there will be a need to in a way, it's like when you're playing chess, you're putting a little bit of positioning, and then hopefully you reach that point that you can actually make the mobilization with the speed that you want. But I think because of the necessities of the time, I think incremental changes, incremental positioning is the order of the day, particularly with regard to with the first 2 years. I'm quite optimistic as far as the third year is concerned, but even then, I believe if we're ever going to really see huge strides, it will probably be the last 3 years or 2 years of the Marcos administration. As far as we are now concerned, let's give this administration a chance and be patient in the way it is able to position as far as the hiring of officials are concerned, giving them enough time to be able to get used to the offices that they are in. Senator Angara obviously has just sat in the Department of Education, and Secretary Teodoro obviously is a returnee at the Department of Defense, but the situation is different when he last sat there under President Arroyo. So it would probably need 1 or 2 more years before our officials really get the rhythm necessary to make a full blast ahead as far as governing is concerned. So right now, essentially, it's a learning curve. But I have to say, and I hope and I invite our people to believe this, that in 2 years, I think the Marcos administration has conducted itself pretty well for the country.
You noted that one of the main accomplishments of the Marcos administration is the country's response of disputes in the West Philippine Sea. What do you think that President Marcos will address regarding the West Philippine Sea in his SONA?
The fact that we have gained the trust of our security allies, that we have a more reliable defense posture, the fact that we have been able to prove the military's professionalism, increased the military's morale, and we have been able to involve ourselves in strategic alliances with a number of countries and we have been able to persuade that their interests utterly lie in the West Philippine Sea, and that is something that the Philippines invites them to join as well. Obviously, if the Philippines needs to go it alone, then we have to, because this is our territory, this is our country. But it is also true that the West Philippine Sea is an area where a lot of the other countries benefit from. And so it is just but right that they be able to help establish the rule of law in that area.
In his SONA last year, President Marcos did not directly address the West Philippine Sea issue, stating instead that the Philippines will pursue continuous dialogue and diplomacy to resolve territorial disputes. Do you think President Marcos will maintain this approach despite the harassment from the Chinese Coast Guard last June?
Well, because they're not necessarily an either-or. We can still conduct diplomacy, but at the same time be able to assert ourselves necessarily, and if it has to do with a certain amount of military emphasis, and I'm not really saying that we should be going into asserting ourselves to the point of inviting violence from any country, but the fact is that diplomacy always needs a conveyance of the reality that if push comes to shove, the country can and will assert itself militarily. If that is not present, then obviously diplomacy will essentially just be a weak diplomacy. It provides us no leverage whatsoever, and China has historically been shown that if they respect one matter, it's the ability to exercise might. And let us not underestimate the Philippines as far as our capabilities are concerned, and our Filipino will is concerned. We certainly have that. And so anyway, going back to answer the direct question, it shouldn't really be an either or thing. It's not a bifurcated methodology that's needed. International relations has a toolbox of mechanisms that we can rely on. And if we can use them all simultaneously, then obviously we should.
Where are we now with President Marcos' diplomacy approach with China?
The problem is not us. I mean, we've already filed gazillions of diplomatic protests. We've summoned their ambassador so many times already. But the thing is that China is not the most honest of international players. They would be, if China were a person, it's a person utterly addicted to gaslighting other people, and that's what China is doing. It's highly difficult to be able to conduct diplomacy with regard to such a player, and so we actually have to commend the Department of Foreign Affairs for the sophistication and the patience that they're doing or engaging in order to be able to deal with such a country. But it's a necessity. I mean, while as much as we would like to develop our military capacity, the need to be able to engage China diplomatically has always to be there. It always has to be on the table. But having said that, I think we've done our part. It's China that has to learn how to play fair, and the moment it realizes that it's part of the international community, as a civilized country, then the better for all of us.
Marcos' political party, Partido Federal ng Pilipinas, advocates for federalism, while Congress approved the economic chacha in March. Do you think President Marcos will address the issue and call for charter change or chacha in his SONA?
I hope he doesn't say anything. I hope he doesn't really push for charter change. considering all the things we've just talked about earlier, to have charter change right now is probably not the most efficient use of our time. Whether it be, well, there's nothing wrong with studying a move towards a federal form of government, but I sincerely believe that looking at our experiences, particularly in the COVID pandemic, when the instinct of our people is essentially to centralize the powers of government, in particular in an emergency situation, most especially, we are simply not built for a federal form of government. We have to work on being a more unified country, and I don't think a move right now to a federal form of government is the most useful way to spend our time. Now, with regard to with regard to the economic provisions, there's some merit to that. And in fact, if I'm going to be asked what would be the best way to be able to amend the Constitution, I would just say perhaps you take Articles 1 to 12, and then all of that in between up to the transitory provisions, you just delete everything. So we're talking here of 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and all up to the transitory provisions, and then just delete all of that. Because I believe that a lot of those provisions shouldn't even be in the Constitution. So we're talking here of provisions on investments, on restrictions on land and all of that. Now, I'm not saying that we don't protect our investments. I'm not saying that we don't protect our property ownership in favor of the Filipinos. What I'm saying is that those provisions are better left in the hands of Congress to be able to address with regard to the exigencies necessary for the time. But to have them in the Constitution, I think is so restrictive that it ties up our ability to be able to respond to the situation as is needed. But again, having said that, I don't think now is the best time to be able to move and divert our country's attention in being able to engage in constitutional amendments. On the other hand, there are certain provisions, I think, in relation to security that perhaps is needed. And it's also possible that a lot of them could be done in relation by not necessarily changing the Constitution, but simply by legislation. One of them is the line on presidential succession, particularly if, and this is all the more needed considering the fact that all our key officials are essentially concentrated in working in the national capital region. There has to be a need to prioritize defense spending over that of education. That may be a controversial idea, but I sincerely believe that it's the best thing that we can do right now. And the other changes that could be made don't need a constitutional amendment. One of them is to be able to empower our local government units, and that can be simply done by amending the local government code.
Mr. Gatdula emphasized that the Marcos administration is generally heading in the right direction in addressing some of the country's economic issues. He also highlighted that President Marcos has made significant progress in protecting our sovereign rights by forming alliances with the international community. However, Mr. Gatdula noted that the education sector requires special attention as this area currently facing issues resulting from previous politicking and the recent change in leadership. Also, other sectors such as agriculture and labor and employment requires further correction and attention as these sectors continue to struggle. As the third State of the Nation address approaches, Mr. Gatdula encourages Filipinos to remain patient and to believe in the Marcos administration. He points out that the sectors facing difficulties are still adapting to the recent change in leadership and express hope that the administration will achieve success within the next year or two. This has been another episode of B-Side. Again, this is Edge Eva. Subscribe now and enjoy industry insights on Philippine business and beyond.